The plague I selected for my project is the Spanish influenza, also known as the 1918 flu. Due to the absence of technology during the time period this influenza struck, there was little scientific research done during to identify the virus, and as a result, it became one of the most challenging discoveries. This timeline shows the progression towards the discovery of the virus. Moreover, it was not until the 1930s when a slight breakthrough for science took place when the strategy for isolating human influenza viruses was established from British and American researchers. However, there were only so many remains available to perform this new scientific technique on. There was an unsuccessful attempt to isolate the virus from the remains in Alaska in the 1950s. In the 1990s, scientist Taubenberger and his colleagues were able to discover the causative agent behind the 1918 flu in 1997 due to the development of molecular biotechnology. In other words, they isolated the viral genome RNA fragments. This resulted in the sequence of 9 fragments of viral RNA from 4 of the virus's 8 gene segments. The pathogenic agent was discovered to be influenza A virus subtype H1N1. It is of the genus species Alpha influenza virus and of the virus family of Orthomyxoviridae. The virus is transmitted through person-to-person airborne respiratory secretions. Through further research efforts, it was discovered that the virus could spread directly or indirectly from humans to birds, which means that the virus comes from an avian origin, but there is only an avian origin for 2 genes and not for 6. From the chart, one can see the mode of transmission for the virus, starting with the typical seasonal flu. Not only does the influenza result from bird to human mixing, for lack of better terms, but also from swine to human influenza viruses. The circulation of the viral and swine genes for the prolonged period of time made it more lethal. The influenza's overall effect on humans ultimately depend on the host and external factors. Symptoms for the virus include fever, chills, cough, sore throat, fatigue, and all of the typical viral symptoms. There is not a treatment for viruses, so the only effective thing to do is treat for symptom relief. The common one today is Tamiflu, but any other antiviral medication is designed to relieve those symptoms. However, the virus can develop resistance to these drugs. To battle the resistance to these medications, doctors typically reserved these medications for patients of the virus that are at high risk. For example, infants or elderly, permanently or temporarily live in a high-risk area are all considered high-risk patients. There was no vaccine for the virus, however today, people are encouraged to get vaccinated as their form of prevention, as the seasonal flu vaccine protects 3 out of the 4 influenza viruses. During the 1918 pandemic, the only thing that people could do for prevention was take part in basic precautions, such as stay at home if you were sick, wash your hands thoroughly and frequently, if no access, then use hand sanitizer, avoid contact if possible, and cover your mouth. This is an image of the influenza A virus under transmission electron micrograph so one can see the nature of it. The pathogen origin for the 1918 flu is known to be of an avian origin, which provides controversy, but there is additional questioning to the theory that the virus's origin can be attributed to human influenza and swine influenza virus genes. The virus is considered to be a zoonotic disease since it does affect many species of birds and mammals. However, it's hard to comprehend how new HA genes spread from an avian characteristic to a form that is compatible with human characteristics. Reed et al. States in their article that previous phylogenetic analysis of H1 sequences suggests that swine and human lineages diverged from a common avian-like ancestor around 1905. Other analyses which propose a higher rate of mutation early in the adaptation of avian influenza strains to mammalian hosts suggest that pandemic virus derived from an avian virus immediately before 1918, possibly through a swine intermediary. Hoag states in her article that the virus could have originated from equine ancestry, but that is unknown and not discussed in this project. The site of origin was never clearly established, as the 1918 flu was believed to have originated in the United States' troops, as the virus was spread to other countries due to World War I going on at that time. In addition, it was believed the virus originated in Spain. That is why it's named the Spanish flu. The king announced in spring of 1918 that he was bedridden, and that could be attributed to the flu epidemic as it spread across Spain. Also, the country was openly publicizing the virus in the news as they were not worried about the war like other countries. The first cases in France were observed in April of 1918. France was infested with the virus due to the troops being sent overseas to the country for the war. Valentine's article states that there was a lot of activity in the training camps, and so gradually over time a cluster of soldiers got sick, complaining of symptoms, and then others got sick as followed. The same outbreak happened in other countries. In this picture, you can see that many soldiers had close interactions with the birds, which is fitting that the virus flourished from bird to human contact. Valentine also states in an article that there were zillions of birds at France's training camp. Oxford says, ducks, geese, chickens, you name it, we have photos of the soldiers plucking them. Between 125,000 and 250 French civilians and around 30,000 French soldiers died. The most susceptible to the virus were those who had other underlying health conditions, and as one can interpret from the chart that the age range that was at high risk were those between 20 and 64 years old. This is because the virus was deadly as it triggered a cytokine storm affecting the immune system of young adults. The virus and the war left France in distraught as they were in a materialistic struggle to recover. People were sick and scared, but there was so much damage not only from World War I, but also the Great War that took place years before. And the movement of troops added to the destruction. Inevitably, change needed to happen. Reconstruction of the country was placed in the hands of specific people in a governing area as they had complete control. National credit was established as a system used to best manage incoming funds. Treasury bonds were used to help France's bank recover funds to put towards reconstruction. Labras states, this semi-public establishment issued secured bonds from the state to pay for immediate reconstruction efforts at the outset, and later to finance medium and long-term financial goals. All of these processes were beneficial in the recovering of France's economy. France, along with other countries within the war, despite Spain, did not want to highlight their specific country's reaction to the 1918 flu. All of the attention needed to be on the war. However, France wanted to be proactive about the situation as well, so safety precautions were enforced along with guidelines. As you can see in the image, that the people were marketing and influencing their own take on preventative measures against the virus. The government's actions towards the virus were really placed in the hands of the people as they encouraged people to reduce transmission and tried to make them as aware as they could with informative posters and such. Enforcing isolation and quarantine amongst the people was one of the greatest contributions they had. If someone was showing symptoms, they were to stay home until better and even consider closing school downs for a complete period of time. However, it was a race to see if closing the schools would be an effective measure, as many believed it was too late. Despite the population's response to increased preventative measures, the virus took over their country since it spread more rapidly as the population of urban areas continued to grow. Also, typically, if the population was higher in a small city or town, sanitation and nutrition were poor. The lack of resources and preparation for this flu pandemic led the country to exhausted efforts and recognition that the control was out of their hands. Furthermore, low-income people in scattered villages struggled to maintain their health due to the lack of medical assistance and availability, and their only known doctors were dying off. The soldiers in the war were held responsible for the virus, but despite it all, the population remained. The influenza over time became less lethal as it started to disappear. But as it disappeared, technology and medicine got more advanced to where they could have studied the virus, but it was too late. The population was encouraged to continue their sanitation and healthy preventative measures to overall reduce the risk of another pandemic outbreak. However, as technology was changing and the virus was studied to where the pathogen was discovered, a vaccine was established. But France did not believe in vaccines the way the United States did. This is because the virus did not hit European countries as hard as it did on the United States. To this day, Taubenberger and other scientists believe that the world is still dealing with the same influenza that originated in 1918, just a different variation. Jeffrey Taubenberger was one of the leading scientists to identify the pathogen responsible for the 1918 flu. He successfully isolated genome RNA fragments of the virus, and in that he discovered that the virus had high virulence. Through the scientific discovery, he was able to redemonstrate that finding on mice. Moreover, he characterized the 1918 flu and changed the perspectives on zoonotic origins. He believes that most of all influenza A cases since 1918 created a ladder composed of those viral genes. The 1918 flu was named the worst flu outbreak recorded, but it did promote and better prepare medical and societal efforts and adaptation to influenzas and other diseases, such as preventative measures including washing hands, quarantine, seek medical help, listen to government officials, etc. Frontiers quote, "The best way to stay equipped and learn is to control the public response." Specifically, it led to the discovery of the influenza vaccines, which is utilized every year for seasonal influenzas, although a seasonal flu is a variation of a pandemic flu to a small degree. The 1918 flu allowed researchers and scientists to be more equipped to prepare and prevent for future influenzas. As mentioned, improvement to public health response and actions towards pandemics were greatly influenced and basic health improved as people were prompted to take health precautions. Infectious disease during the 1918 flu was well known as previous experience with disease such as the Black Plague impacted the community. However, during that time, disease was related to the church. NCBI states poor morale and spiritual condition. Again, isolation and quarantine, if showing symptoms, was encouraged. The Great Sanitary Awakening was a growth in scientific knowledge, connection between disease and poverty, water supply and sewage renewal, monitor community health status, and so much more. NCBI states that the sanitation also changed the way society thought about public responsibility for citizens' health. Yet France questioned the Great Sanitary Awakening due to water pollution. Bacteriology in the 20th century became the basis for disease control. Spain was the scapegoat for the 1918 flu as people believed that is where the virus originated. This is because Spain was the only country in the world that was not worried about discussing another influential topic other than the war, which could weaken the population. They kept a neutral stance. In addition, the King of Spain announced he had fallen ill with the virus, so it only made sense to blame Spain. Ironically, though, Spain did not really struggle with the virus in comparison to those oppressing countries, because they only had around 260,000 deaths. The missing voices and silence did not occur until after the flu had passed. The entire world was in a giant mental and physical destruction, and the bearing was unreal. Many were constantly reminded of the people they lost and the trauma they endured. Bristow in her book states that the pandemic just disrupted everyone's life and did not really influence real change, other than the fact that the real problem was within the values of the nations. Specifically, the United States refocused their attention to the classifications of their own, like disease and poverty. The primary article by Watanabe and Kawoka was utilized many times throughout this project. The lack of advancement in technology and medicine prohibited scientists and researchers from discovering the influenza. Their article sections out the history of the flu, the efforts once discovered, and the scientific research and experiments that followed after that. It was known that many soldiers were held responsible for the transmission of the virus as they got sick, and then others did as well after. It happened so fast that the duration of the virus was shortened to just 5 days, and by the 1919 winter, about 30% of the world's population had died. This quote discusses the mortality rate and shows just how deadly the virus was. The modern-day relevance of the 1918 flu is very much applicable, especially today due to the fact that we are currently in a pandemic. Pandemics are hard to prepare for as they take control so fast and leave people with only uncertainty and motivation for scientific discovery and action. In other words, influenza A viruses are the only viruses that can cause a flu pandemic. So the 1918 flu and COVID-19 are similar as they are both flu pandemics. Doctors are overwhelmed and not as equipped as they are for seasonal flus, as these types of flus only happen so often, typically every 20 years. Compliance of the people in government is the only way that allow people to gain a sense of control over the situation. For the 1918 flu, Army Surgeon General demanded that the influenza be kept out, as once it is established, it cannot be stopped. Government action needs to be present as the people depend on their government officials to provide structure, even if there is uncertainty. For the 1918 flu, the economy stopped, places shut down, gatherings were prohibited, etc., which is the same that is going on right now. Masks were also enforced during both pandemics. Influenza A and B viruses are the only types that cause most human illnesses and are responsible for the flu season each year. Most people have little to no immunity because they have no previous exposure to the virus or similar viruses to pandemic flus.